Somewhere out there, someone is lighting up for what they think will be the last time. They're sitting in a room, maybe alone, maybe surrounded by people who've long stopped noticing. They tell themselves this is the final hit, the last exhale before change begins. They believe it because they want to, because part of them still remembers what it felt like to live without needing something to numb the weight. But even deeper than belief sits something heavier. Doubt wrapped in routine, in habit, in the quiet grief of watching your own potential drown in smoke. For so many, it starts with a choice that doesn't look like a choice. A moment, a hit, a thoughtless escape that becomes the rhythm of their existence. And they never see the chains being formed link by invisible link until one day they look around and realize that the escape became the prison. 6 months. To someone who hasn't fought addiction, it might sound small, just a few pages on a calendar. But to someone who's lived inside the haze, who's built their identity around a substance that slowly rewrites your needs, your thoughts, your reactions, 6 months is a lifetime. 6 months is a war. It's hundreds of mornings waking up and resisting the whisper that says, you were better with it. It's nights filled with cravings that come dressed in nostalgia. It's birthdays, weekends, stressful Tuesdays, lazy Sundays, all the moments that used to be padded with that chemical comfort, suddenly sharp and real and asking you to show up. That's not easy. That's not soft work. That's a kind of strength most people never have to develop. But something happens the longer you walk that path of sobriety. The noise begins to quiet. The tug lessens. The fog starts to lift. You start to see things you'd forgotten were even there, like sunlight on your skin not dulled by numbness, or a full breath that doesn't rattle in your chest, or laughter that comes from a place not tinged with the dry film of detachment. Time becomes clearer. Days become longer in a good way, not in the stretched, unbearable drag of withdrawal, but in the spacious fullness of being present. There's something incredibly powerful about presence when you've lived so long inside escape. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's real, and real has a weight to it that feels unfamiliar at first, then necessary, then sacred. The first weeks are always the hardest. Not because the body misses the drug, though it does. Not just because the mind throws tantrums, though it will. It's because you're facing a world without the thing you thought made it bearable. And it's terrifying. But what no one tells you, what most never understand, is that buried under that fear is the very strength you always had but forgot how to access. Every hard moment becomes a doorway to that strength. Every craving you walk past becomes a brick in the foundation of your new self, and eventually those bricks stack up to something solid, something unshakable, something you start to believe in, something like freedom. But it's not perfect. Temptation never fully leaves. Even after months of clarity, there are still echoes. You pass by a familiar scent in the air and something inside you stirs. You drive by the same corner store or dispensary, and memory pulls at you like gravity. You think, just for a second, how easy it would be to go back, how smooth the lie still sounds. One puff won't matter, just one day off won't ruin everything. You've earned it. You deserve it. And maybe you even agree with the voice in your head, but here's the thing. When you finally understood the nature of your attachment, when you've admitted that you're not the kind of person who can dabble, who can moderate, who can keep it casual, that's when the power returns to your hands. Because in knowing the truth, you are no longer a victim to the story. Addiction is clever. It changes its outfit. It pretends to be relief. It disguises itself as reward. But at its core, it's just an erosion. A slow, steady wear on your willpower, your relationships, your health, your ambition. And the worst part is that you don't even see the damage until something inside you finally wakes up and says, enough. Not out of shame, not out of judgment, but out of hunger. Hunger for life that isn't edited by substances. Hunger for a version of yourself that doesn't need to be softened to be tolerable. That hunger is what drives transformation. That's what flips the script, not fear, not punishment, but desire. Deep, aching desire for something more than the numbing carousel of highs and forgettings. And when the shift begins, when the chemicals start to fade and your natural self steps back into the light, you start to notice things that were buried, like anxiety that no longer needs a cage, like sadness that can be felt fully without swallowing you whole, like breath that doesn't burn, like mornings that begin with clarity instead of confusion. Because here's the truth, what many people believe is medicine is often a mask. And while masks can protect, they also obscure. They stop us from healing because they stop us from seeing. But when the mask drops, when the haze clears, you face the world bare, and in that bareness is the opportunity to become whole. There's something worth saying about the physical side of sobriety too. It's not just emotional resilience that grows. The body starts repairing itself in ways that feel almost miraculous. Breathing becomes fuller. Movement becomes easier. That tightness in the chest loosens. That lingering cough fades. The mornings come with less grogginess and more gratitude. It's like your lungs begin to trust you again. Your heart beats steadier. Your sleep deepens. And you start to remember that health was never supposed to feel like a luxury. It was supposed to be your baseline. But it doesn't stop there. Sobriety affects how you eat, how you rest, how you move through the world. When the fog lifts, so does the constant craving, the impulse to reach for whatever's salty, sweet, greasy, comforting at midnight softens. The late-night binge that was once part of the ritual disappears, and suddenly your body isn't begging for balance anymore. It's finding it. The scale shifts, not just in weight, but in awareness. You notice the difference between hunger and habit. You learn how to listen to your body, not just feed your emotions. That kind of mindfulness changes everything. It teaches you to live from the inside out, not the outside in. And it's not just the body or the mind, it's your identity that changes. When you've lived for years calling yourself a smoker, a user, a stoner, a just this one thing person, it becomes the lens you see yourself through. But sobriety wipes the lens. It removes the label. You're no longer the person who needs it to function. You're the one who chose to break free, and that choice rewrites the story of who you are. You're not your cravings. You're not your past. You're not your worst days or your lowest decisions. You're the courage it took to wake up one morning and say, I don't want this anymore. You're the discipline it takes to keep saying no. You're the clarity that's starting to return. You're the resilience that bloomed in the absence of the thing you once thought you couldn't live without. The world doesn't always celebrate that kind of heroism. It doesn't make headlines, but make no mistake, choosing sobriety is revolutionary. In a culture that profits off your dependency, deciding to take your power back is an act of rebellion. And every day you choose it again, you sharpen that rebellion into a blade that cuts through all the noise, all the marketing, all the social conditioning that says you need a substance to feel okay. You don't. You never did. You just forgot for a while. And you're remembering now. There is a quiet revolution happening in places no one sees. It doesn't unfold on stages or in arenas. It's not celebrated with applause or broadcast with bright lights. It begins in private spaces, inside cars idling in silence, in dimly lit kitchens at midnight, in the pause before a relapse that never comes. The revolution is this: the decision to no longer need escape in order to endure the world. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it's profound. And once that fire has been lit, no high can replicate the power of waking up to your own potential. Addiction isn't always about rock bottoms and public collapses. Sometimes it's subtle. It grows slowly, like mold in the dark. It disguises itself as a comfort, a routine, a reward for surviving another stressful day. It doesn't knock down the door. It slides in quietly, offering relief, distraction, false peace. And by the time you recognize its grip, it's already wrapped around everything. For many, the substance becomes an identity. It weaves into their daily rhythm. It offers false stability. But over time, that synthetic piece starts charging interest, stealing energy, ambition, health, connection, presence. Yet, despite how deep the hooks go, change is always within reach. Not overnight, not painlessly, but absolutely. Transformation begins not with willpower alone, but with honesty, the raw kind, the uncomfortable kind, the kind that asks you to admit not just that things are broken, but that they never served you the way you thought they did. To break free, you must first see clearly, not just the damage, not just the regret, but the truth that you deserve more than survival laced with sedation, that real healing doesn't come from numbing the pain, but from walking through it with eyes open and fists unclenched. And so begins the ascent, day by day, thought by thought. Every craving resisted becomes a line in the story of rebirth, and it is a rebirth because the person you become in the absence of addiction is not the same one who lived beneath it. In the space where substance once reigned, new life takes root. It doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels unbearable. But those moments are proof that you're waking up. They are the growing pains of rediscovering what it means to feel everything, fully, fiercely, without a filter. The mind doesn't quiet right away. It may scream louder at first. Anxiety may try to reclaim the space it once shared with weed or alcohol or pills. Doubt may echo louder in the silence. But keep going, because silence is where you start to hear yourself again. The real voice, the one that doesn't beg for escape, but longs for clarity. The one that remembers what it's like to laugh without being altered, to cry and not apologize for it, to be present and unarmored and whole. As clarity returns, something else begins to bloom. Discipline, not the punishing kind, not the rigid, cold brand of discipline that feels like self-denial, but the fierce, loving kind. The kind that chooses your future self over your current craving. The kind that says, no, not because you hate yourself, but because you finally understand your worth. And that discipline radiates outward. It starts showing up in other corners of your life, in how you move, how you eat, how you rest, how you love. Because when you stop poisoning yourself, everything else starts healing too. Your sleep deepens, not just in duration, but in quality. You begin to dream again, literally and metaphorically. You remember what it's like to wake up and not feel like you're pulling your body out of cement. Your mornings become launch pads, not recovery zones. Your nights become sacred, not sedated. There's a profound difference between rest and sedation, and once you taste the former, the latter becomes unbearable. You begin to crave the kind of stillness that replenishes, not the kind that robs you in silence. Your relationships shift too. At first you may feel distant. You may notice how many connections were built on shared escapes, on the convenience of mutual denial. But slowly, the fog clears and the people who matter begin to surface. You become more present, more attuned, more available. Conversations deepen. Eye contact becomes easier. You hear laughter and realize it sounds different when you're not hiding behind a chemical wall. It vibrates deeper. It lands heavier. It heals. With presence comes vulnerability, and with vulnerability comes connection. That's the part people don't talk about when they glamorize being high, how it keeps you just slightly out of reach, from others, from yourself, from the moment. You're there but not really, close but not quite, and that space between who you are and who you could be is where regret thrives. Sobriety closes that gap. It brings you home to yourself. It lets you show up fully. And when you start showing up, your relationships change because you change. Family feels different when you're present for the moments instead of watching them through a cloud. Intimacy becomes richer when you're not numbing the edges. Children notice, partners notice. You notice, not all at once, not in some dramatic crescendo, but slowly, steadily, the pieces click into place. You remember birthdays without reminders. You laugh more freely. You listen without distraction. You argue less. You engage more. You start becoming the version of yourself you always hoped you could be, the one that isn't hiding, isn't masking, isn't shrinking. Sobriety also awakens something primal, clarity. Not just mental sharpness, but emotional precision. You start understanding your triggers. You catch the thought before it spirals. You see the pattern before it tightens. Your reactions slow. Your awareness heightens. You feel emotions more deeply, yes, but you also learn to navigate them. And you realize you were never weak for feeling them. You were just untrained. Now you're training. You're learning the terrain of your own psyche without a crutch. That's powerful, that's brave. And with that clarity comes ambition. Real ambition. The kind that doesn't burn out by noon or fade under pressure. You begin to think bigger. Plan clearer, execute more consistently. Suddenly, projects that once felt overwhelming seem possible. Tasks you avoided become accomplishments. You remember how good it feels to finish something, really finish it. Not just start and abandon, not just dream and delay, but see it through. That sense of agency returns. You start trusting yourself again. That might be the greatest gift of all, the rebuilding of self-trust, of knowing that you can keep your word, that your promises to yourself matter now. You also begin to see the absurdity of what you once believed. You remember thinking you were more creative when you were high, that you were more relaxed, more focused, more yourself. But now, with distance, you see how much of that was illusion. You realize you were sacrificing presence for the promise of peace. And now the real version of that peace is beginning to emerge, earned, not purchased, rooted, not borrowed. Peace that doesn't fade when the high wears off. Peace that comes from living in integrity, from alignment, from truth. Then there's the money. You see it accumulating again, staying in your account instead of going up in smoke. And it's not just the money, it's what the money represents. Awareness, control, freedom. Every dollar not spent on escape becomes a vote for your future. Every saved penny becomes evidence that you're no longer willing to fund your own diminishment. And the numbers add up fast. When you look back on the thousands spent over the years, it hits you. That wasn't investment. That was tax on pain. A fee paid for avoiding what you didn't yet know how to face. But now you're facing it, and you're not alone. There are thousands walking beside you. Quiet warriors choosing presence over comfort. Every day, every hour. Some still shaking, some still tempted, but walking nonetheless. And every step matters. Every no is a yes to something better. Every hard moment is a chapter in your redemption. This is not a story of deprivation. It's a story of reclamation, of taking back your mornings, your lungs, your clarity, your peace, your potential. And with time, you start to forgive yourself for the years you lost, for the people you hurt, for the time spent numbed and distracted. Forgiveness comes not because you forget, but because you finally understand. You were surviving the only way you knew how, and now you're learning a better way. You're building new tools, and you're wielding them every day. That deserves grace. That deserves compassion. The world will tempt you. It always does. There will be ads, smells, jokes, songs, friends who offer a hit just this once. There will be stress, loss, celebration, boredom, every emotion that used to trigger the old cycle. But now you have new patterns, new rituals, new strength. You know what happens when you say yes. You've seen the ending of that story. And now you're writing a new one, page by page, breath by breath. And maybe, just maybe, you'll become the reason someone else chooses to start their story too. Because courage is contagious. And every time you rise, someone else finds a reason to believe they can rise too. There comes a moment in the journey when things begin to quiet. Not the world, but the war inside. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not dramatic, but it is undeniable. Like the sky slowly clearing after a storm, you begin to notice that the constant noise, the hunger that once haunted you, doesn't scream quite as loud anymore. The cravings, once volcanic, begin to lose their grip. You start to feel space inside your mind again. Not emptiness, but room to breathe, to think, to build, to live. This is the turning point. This is when you no longer feel like you're holding on for dear life, but instead beginning to reclaim it. It's where resilience becomes rhythm. And make no mistake, this rhythm wasn't handed to you. It was forged in discomfort, sculpted from restless nights and lonely mornings, tempered by every single time you said no to the part of you that still wanted escape, the part of you that begged to be pacified, the part that didn't want to feel it all. You stood up to that voice, not once, not twice, but again and again, until the silence inside you felt like strength and not punishment. Because that's what sobriety gives you back, choice. In the thick of addiction, everything becomes reactive. You respond to life like a match to gasoline. Quick, messy, often burning yourself in the process. But with every sober day, the distance between impulse and action grows. You begin to choose again. You decide how you respond. You notice your feelings before they consume you. You breathe before you lash out. You pause before you spiral. And in that pause, you discover power. It's a strange and beautiful awakening to realize that you don't need to dull yourself to survive, that you don't have to feel small to stay safe, that being fully alive, even when it hurts, is far better than being halfway awake. You find courage not in absence of pain, but in your capacity to walk through it. You stop running, and when you stop running, you start building. Your relationships grow roots. Your work becomes more focused. Your mind stops darting like a nervous animal. You begin to arrive in your life, not just pass through it. This new version of you, the one showing up fully, seeing clearly and choosing differently, starts doing things the old version couldn't. You clean your home, not because you're avoiding something, but because it feels good to live in order. You answer the phone. You make appointments. You return messages. You start showing up for life's little tasks, not with dread, but with presence. Even when they're boring, even when they're frustrating, because you understand now that these small things are not meaningless. They're stitches in the fabric of a life with integrity. You also begin to pursue things that once felt distant. Maybe it's fitness. Maybe it's reading. Maybe it's building a skill that you've always admired from afar, but never believed you had the focus for. Now, with your mind untangled, with your lungs no longer burning, with your days no longer anchored to rituals of sedation, you have room. room to grow, room to reach. You find joy in momentum, not the manic energy of a temporary high, but the deep, sustainable push of genuine progress. And with that progress, your confidence returns, not arrogance, not false bravado, but a quiet, grounded belief that you can trust yourself again. You become the kind of person who keeps promises, not just to others, but to yourself. That might sound simple to someone who's never lost that ability, but for those who have, regaining it feels like discovering fire. You realize that self-trust isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in consistency. In the mornings, you wake up and hydrate. In the nights, you go to bed without needing a chemical lullaby. In the days, you show up to work or parenthood or friendships fully. This consistency becomes your new identity. It replaces the old narrative, the one that whispered you were unreliable, unworthy, or incapable of change. And perhaps most surprising of all, you begin to feel joy again. Real joy, not the artificial burst that fades fast and leaves you emptier, but the kind that roots itself in simple things. A walk under open sky, a good meal shared with someone you love, laughter that comes without a crutch, a morning where you wake up and feel light. This kind of joy is not loud. It doesn't chase you down. It emerges slowly like a sunrise. And when it comes, you realize how much of your life you've been missing, not because you weren't there, but because you were clouded. Sobriety sharpens your senses. You begin to see beauty where before you saw only dullness. You hear music differently. You notice the way leaves move in the wind. You feel textures. Smells return, taste comes alive. This isn't romanticism, it's reality. When you remove the constant film over your existence, the world becomes vivid. And not just the world outside, but the world within. You begin to access parts of yourself you forgot were there. Compassion, creativity, curiosity. You're not just surviving anymore, you're expanding. And yet, even with all this growth, you remain humble because you remember. You remember the nights you swore you'd stop and didn't. You remember the mornings laced with regret. You remember the lies you told to hide how far you'd fallen. That memory becomes your guide, not your prison. It keeps you grounded. It keeps you grateful. It keeps you from ever thinking you're beyond slipping, because anyone can fall, but not everyone rises, and you did. You are. There is another layer to all this, the ripple effect. Your healing doesn't just change you, it changes your circle. When you step into your light, others begin to feel brave enough to step into theirs. Your discipline becomes permission. Your transformation becomes a mirror. You may never know the full reach of your impact, but it is there. In the conversations you have with friends who are struggling, in the way your kids see you show up now, in the quiet encouragement your presence gives others who are walking through their own darkness. You become a lighthouse, not perfect, not unbreakable, but lit. And that light saves people, just like someone's once saved you. And let's talk about time. Not just how much of it you've reclaimed, but how you experience it now. Before, time slipped through your fingers. Whole hours vanished in a fog, days blurred together. You were always either numbing the moment or chasing the next one. But now time stretches, it opens. You feel it again. Mornings have weight, evenings have meaning. You measure your life not in highs and crashes, but in real tangible experiences. Meals shared, books read, projects completed, goals met, moments remembered, not forgotten. Even boredom feels different. Before it was unbearable, now it's a gift. A space where ideas are born, a moment to breathe. You begin to understand that peace is not the absence of sensation, but the presence of contentment. You learn to sit with stillness, to be with your own thoughts. That's a skill that many never master, but you're mastering it now. Every quiet moment you don't try to fill with smoke or noise is a step deeper into yourself. And what you find there is not emptiness, but depth. What used to feel like sacrifice now feels like sanctuary. What once seemed like deprivation becomes liberation. You're not giving up joy, you're rediscovering its true form. You're not losing your edge, you're sharpening your soul. You're not missing out, you're tuning in to life, to presence, to purpose. And yes, there are still hard days, days when everything feels dull, days when stress coils around your spine, days when the old temptations whisper again. But now you're equipped, you have strategies, you have experience, you've built a track record. You know how to walk past the smoke shop without pausing. You know how to let a craving pass like a wave. You know how to sit with discomfort and not let it win. That's power, quiet, formidable, earned power. There is also the unexpected blessing of clarity in your ambitions. Sobriety doesn't just make you functional, it makes you fierce. You don't just dream, you execute. You don't just talk about goals, you break them into actions. You find the discipline to write, to train, to build, to serve. You hold your own attention. You focus longer. You finish what you start. And through that, your confidence becomes unshakable, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. You also begin to remember who you were before the substances. The young dreamer, the hopeful heart, the curious mind, and you see now that none of that was lost. It was just buried. Now you're digging it up, dusting it off, honoring it again. That version of you still lives, and now it gets to breathe. Maybe the most profound realization is this: the substance was never the solution. It was a pause button. It was a silencer. It was a fog machine. But now you don't want fog. You want clarity. You want the hard truths, the deep laughter, the open eyes. You want the full, uncensored experience of life, even when it hurts, especially when it heals. And that is the essence of recovery, not becoming someone new, but finally becoming who you were always meant to be. There's a moment not marked by fanfare or ceremony when you realize you've crossed a threshold. You've stepped beyond the grip of what once held you. Not perfectly, not without scars, but wholly. That moment is quiet. It doesn't arrive with applause. It shows up in the ordinary. When you laugh deeply without needing a buffer, when you handle a crisis without spiraling, when you sit alone with your thoughts and feel calm instead of chaos. That's the true marker of transformation, not the absence of struggle, but the arrival of peace where panic used to live. There's something sacred about becoming the version of yourself that no longer needs constant escape. When the cravings visit now, they find a different home, one that doesn't open the door so easily. And in those visits, you don't panic. You observe. You breathe. You remember. You've built resilience not through denial, but through presence. You've chosen to face life in its rawness and complexity. And because of that, you become someone forged, not frayed, by fire. And as you sit with this newfound clarity, you start seeing the bigger truth. Addiction was never just about the substance. It was about avoidance. It was about pain, unresolved and silent. It was about a need that wasn't being met and a wound that never got to heal. But now, you're tending to that wound. You're meeting those needs in real ways, through community, through action, through truth, through love. The person you were when you started this journey might not recognize you now, and that's a good thing. Growth requires change, It demands discomfort. It requires the shedding of identities you outgrow. You don't owe allegiance to your past self. You owe commitment to your future. And your future is now being built, not on fantasy or chemical illusions, but on foundation, steady, earned, solid. You've started to live in the present again. Really live. Not endure, not drift, but participate. You're listening to your children with both ears. You're holding conversations with real attention. You're walking into rooms without the fog trailing behind you. You're here now. And being here changes everything. It deepens relationships. It reveals opportunities. It renews your joy. Sobriety doesn't just take something away. It restores what you didn't realize you'd lost. You begin to see patterns in others too. You recognize the look in someone's eyes when they're running from something. You hear the excuses you once used spoken from other mouths. And you don't judge. You empathize because you remember what it felt like to need something just to feel level. But now, you offer more than understanding. You offer an example, not through preaching, not through boasting, but simply by living, by being present, by thriving in a way that whispers to others, this is possible, it can be done. Even the structure of your days changes. The calendar no longer bends around a high. The schedule isn't built to accommodate withdrawal. Your time is now yours again. And that freedom is both exhilarating and unfamiliar. What used to be a blur of maintenance now becomes a canvas. You decide how to spend your energy. You decide where to place your focus. The drug is no longer the center of your orbit. You are. Creativity returns in waves, not the chaotic, fleeting inspiration that comes from a synthetic spark, but the deep-rooted kind, the ideas that come at dawn, the clarity that meets you mid-stride, the flow that sustains itself. You find yourself building, writing, solving, imagining, because your mind is no longer a battlefield. It's a garden now, tended, cared for, capable of producing beauty. Your physical body continues to thank you in small but steady ways. Breathing becomes deeper. Movement becomes easier. Sleep becomes restorative. That wheeze you didn't even realize you'd normalized disappears. The coughing stops. The tightness in your chest loosens. You're no longer dragging yourself through the day. You're moving through it. With intention, with strength, with vitality. You even eat differently now, not out of guilt or impulse, but awareness. You feel what your body wants instead of reacting to every craving. The connection between what you consume and how you feel becomes unmistakable. You no longer chase sugar or salt to quiet the come down. You nourish, you hydrate, you honor your biology. You're treating yourself like someone worth caring for. And that's a radical act in a world that encourages self-abandonment. And let's speak plainly, your emotions are stronger. Not in the sense that they overwhelm you, but in their richness. You cry more easily, you laugh more deeply, you love more fiercely. You're no longer buffering everything, you're in it, feeling all of it. And that vulnerability, once terrifying, becomes your greatest strength, because through it, you become relatable, human, authentic. No masks, no haze, just truth. You also become aware of how time bent around your addiction, how many conversations you missed, how many holidays you coasted through, how many dreams you shelved. It hurts at first to count the cost, but don't stay there. Let it fuel you. Let it remind you why you never want to go back. Not because you're afraid, but because you know what life looks like now, and you're not trading it for anything. Sobriety makes you dangerous in the best possible way. You become someone who can't be manipulated by numbing agents. Someone who sees clearly, speaks honestly, moves intentionally. Someone who builds, who uplifts, who leads. The world doesn't expect people like you to rise. But here you are, standing in your clarity, choosing consciousness over comfort, presence over passivity, meaning over momentary relief. And the greatest surprise? You find yourself becoming hopeful, not in some abstract positive thinking way, but in the real grounded sense that you know your future holds good things, that you are building a life worthy of your energy, that you are no longer waiting for change. You are it. You are the change. You've seen how far you've come. You know how much further you can go. There's a freedom that comes when you realize you no longer need to be anyone else but who you are right now, that you don't have to reach for something to change your state, that your unaltered mind is enough, that your bare heart is brave. You stop seeking escape and start seeking elevation. You climb, you dig, you plant, you grow. Your story is no longer one of addiction. It's one of redemption, of reclamation, of rebuilding. You are not your cravings. You are not your past. You are the decisions you continue to make every day in the direction of your highest self. And those decisions are shaping a legacy, not just for you, but for those who watch you, who learn from you, who walk beside you. You may never get an award for this, no standing ovations, no medals, but what you gain is far more valuable than public praise. You gain self-respect, you gain clarity, you gain time, you gain peace. And those things cannot be bought, faked, or forced. They must be earned. And you've earned them. One choice, one breath, one day at a time. And perhaps above all, you gain possibility. Because once you've proven to yourself that you can overcome something that once felt immovable, there's nothing you can't face. You walk into new challenges with a quiet kind of confidence. You've seen your own darkness, you've endured it, and you didn't run, you rebuilt. That is your superpower. So the next time you look in the mirror, don't just see the face staring back. See the journey. See the moments you resisted the urge, the nights you cried but didn't cave, the mornings you rose despite the wait, the days you chose growth over gratification. You are the embodiment of persistence. You are what resilience looks like. You are proof that healing is possible, that change is real, that light can return even after years of shadow. You are living evidence that we are not our mistakes, that we can write new stories, that we can love ourselves enough to stop surviving and start truly living. This isn't the end of your story. It's only the beginning. And you're just getting started.